Yes, it would have been in the middle to late 1940s, just after the end of the Second World War. I used to come here every Sunday morning with my parents. It was a family routine to go to 8 o'clock church at Holy Trinity in the mornings. My dad was a vestryman there, and then we would come home, get the dog, and we would come down here to get the week's fish supply. And the very mention of the word fish, in fact we had to spell F-I-S-H because we couldn't say fish in front of the dog, because the mention of the word fish meant a walk on the beach with the destination right here at the shed. And we would come around the beach with the dog every Sunday morning, and there was an old fella called Percy Begbie who worked for Billy Earwicker, the proprietor of this shed. But Billy didn't work early Sunday mornings, and Percy Begbie used to look after the shed for him, and he would buy small flathead, not undersized, but small flathead from amateur fishermen who would be out Saturday night and Sunday morning, and he would resell them. Quite illegal, of course, but that was the 40s, and that was how things were, I guess. So we would walk around, and from Percy we would get some flathead, half a dozen flathead or so, and my mother would clean and cook those flathead. I didn't like them. I liked the flavour, but I tested the small bones, and then later on, of course, she would do flathead tails, which had no bones, and then all the rest of the flathead would be minced for her famous fish patties. Fish otherwise from that was from the fish shop, and it was invariably cooter, which I didn't like the smell or the taste of, or the bones, although I enjoyed the chips. But we felt really special that we got this fresh fish every week, and invariably on Sunday or Monday we would have a fish meal. Yes, I started to come later on when I was allowed to the beach on my own. My social life revolved around the jetty or the pier out here. It was a big jetty and it was busy, and there were professional fishermen here and lots of local people. All the boats in the harbour were on swing moorings, and so there were lots of dinghies here, and there was always activity and things coming and going. We would jump off the pier and we would swim, and in this photograph here you can see that part way along, which is where the sand is today, there was a lower landing, and kids could jump off there into fairly deep water and swim around. It was quite safe. If you were big and brave, weren't scared of the sharks and stingrays, of course, you could go out to the jetty, the lower landing further out, but I wasn't big enough for that sort of trick because you couldn't see the bottom. Then I became friendly with the Defina boys, whose father was a professional, father and uncle were professional fishermen, and they had the shed next door. They had a fleet of fishing boats here in the harbour and also in Western Port Bay at Stony Point. I would do anything to get aboard any sort of boat that floated. It didn't matter what it was. My parents were not interested in boats or the water, but I certainly was. And so I would hang around that shed next door. It became our sort of cubby house headquarters. It was a magical place. It was full of nets, long lines, hooks, grapples, bits of chain, piles of rope, and bags of salted whitebait, which we would often eat, believe it or not, out of the bags. It's very different today, and we had surfboards in the shed next door. We built those ourselves. When I say surfboards, they were not boards like the accepted boards that you have with foam sandwich and fiberglass coating. We built our own boards. We framed them in kauri, New Zealand kauri. The end blocks are in red gum. They were coated in marine 3-ply, painted in or varnished, painted in designs, and they had a brass bung in one end to drain them. And our boards were 17 foot 10 long. The reason they were 17 foot 10 in the old measurement is that shed next door is 18 feet, and when you shut the door there was 17 foot 10 and a half left, and so our surfboards just took up the whole length of the shed. We would carry them across there and launch them where that opening is, because that was a ramp. It's here in my book. I can show you there's a famous picture of a shark that was caught just offshore, and the timbers there are still under there, under the dirt and the sand, and we slid our boards down into the water, or if we were using a dinghy, we slid that down into the water, and we paddled or rowed under the jetty where all that sand is. It was water lapping right up to this stone wall. It was quite a drop to the water, as you can see by the level out there. That hasn't changed. There was no sand there whatsoever, and this was all a harbour with boats moored, as you can see in the picture here, on swing moorings. I remember this place as the boat hire with Billy Earwicker running it, and there were boats moored nose to tail in a row along the jetty in the shallow water. When the tide was out and the water was low, there was a flying fox with a cable that ran across to a pole on the jetty, and boats were taken overhead and put in the water, and people hired those boats. It was a very busy business, but of course they were all rowing boats. There were no motorised boats in those days, and people came down with their fishing rods and gear, hired a boat and went out for the day and rowed out round the jetty. We paddled our surfboards, as I said, through there, and we went out past the old submarine and round the point, and would paddle down to Black Rock and Abbott Street Beach, where the best looking girls that we knew from school and church and everything were. And that was our social environment in those days in the early 50s. It was always a meeting place, and it obviously still is today. But there were always people hanging around here, old boaties of all sorts. And Billy Earwicker himself was quite a character. He was a small man with a sharp tongue. A lot of people were frightened of him, and you certainly wouldn't want to cross him. You could hear his voice out on the jetty when he got upset about something. He spoke very quickly and loudly. Percy Begbie, the old bloke who worked for him at weekends, used to do odd jobs at our shop. He was just an interesting old character, and as I got to know him, I found out he'd been a soldier in the First World War. In fact, he'd been a mounted trooper in the Light Horse, and he was a very interesting character. There was another character here called Pappy. Everybody knew Pappy, and his real name was Signor Papi. He was Italian, and he'd come off an Italian ship. He was a ship's engineer, I believe, and he had a fishing boat here. And he always talked to us kids. He was a great philosopher, and he always said to me, learn languages. You must learn languages. Too many people in Australia only know English. You should travel and learn languages. Very good advice. The interesting thing about Pappy was that he always wore boots, thick corduroy trousers, a roll neck jumper and a beanie in summer, and with an overcoat in winter. I never saw him take the thick jumper off. I seldom saw him take the beanie off just to wipe the bead of sweat off his forehead. But he was always dressed like that. And he did fishing, he did all sorts of jobs. He worked on motors for people, he took people out to their boats. All the boats were on swing moorings in those days. And as I told you, he taught me the difference between a buyer's market and a seller's market, because he would take you out to your boat on a swing mooring for a day's fishing for threepence, 2 cents. But once you'd had your day's fishing, and bearing in mind that there were plenty of people on the jetty who would take you out to your swing mooring for threepence, we kids would row you out in one of Defina's boats for threepence. But later on, when there were not so many people around and you came back to your mooring and wanted to get to the jetty and there was no way apart from a swim, Pappy would come and pick you up. But to summon him from the jetty was a hiring fee, and it was 2 bob, 2 shillings 20 cents, because he had a captive market. Yes, I think that any old building like this is significant. It's the last remnant of all the boat sheds, and bearing in mind that there were boat sheds right around the point. Here, it's an old photo showing boat sheds from here before all the bathing boxes started further round, and lots of people kept small boats here and dragged them across the sand and launched them. It was very much a boating precinct, and this is the last vestige really, apart from the couple of sheds beside that remind us of the history of this area. As I said, I grew up in Defina's shed. There were two sheds next door, and they were originally boating sheds with boats in them, and then they were taken over by the ladies of the Victorian Ladies Yacht Club. And they had their club headquarters and kept their boats in there, which they took across and launched all their yachts straight from this point just out here at the front. That later on moved to the site occupied now by the Hampton Sailing Club, and that's in the building that the Victorian Ladies Yacht Club purchased. But I think this has always been a meeting place. I mean, in the period after I was talking about Pappy, there were always colourful characters here. Bazza Many was always here. Hank and Unk ran the place, and there were always people round about. Some very, very interesting fishermen, Harry Acton and other people always came, professional fishermen and amateurs came here and had a common sort of meeting ground. And there wasn't the standoff in those days, although the amateurs said that the professionals cleaned out all the fish and left nothing for them. The professionals said the amateurs were a bit of a nuisance and didn't observe size limits and bag limits and things, and were a pain in the bum for them too. So, but it was all good-natured. It wasn't any degree of real animosity about it. And certainly in those days there was a lot of fish brought into this harbour. You would see. I have fond memories of Defina's coming in with boxes and boxes and boxes of snapper from the long lines, and they had one net. I remember going out with them one night and early morning pulling the net, and it was 1.3 miles long. It spanned from here right up to from Brighton Beach right up around the beach there, and they would pull in lots of fish. I can also remember pilchards when they were running. There's a famous photo in the Herald Sun of the Definas knee-deep in pilchards in their boat, and they were shoveling them with coal shovels into boxes and sending them off to market. And fish in this bay were very prolific in those days.
Now, what continues to draw you down to the shed, to this area?
Well, I come to this area regularly because I have a boat which was on the swing mooring. It's now in the Yacht Club Marina, but my boat was originally one that was associated with this shed. My boat was built in 1934, and the previous owners used to pull it up here on the sand and work on it before there was this. It went on the slipway in the Yacht Club. And this whole area in front, where all the grass and trees are now, was open sand, and there were always 6 to 10 boats up on props being painted or worked on or repaired or whatever. That was another thing that brought people to this area, because this is where they came for a cup of tea or whatever, a yarn with Hank and Unk, or where they came for a degree of expertise on how they fixed this bit, or who they got to tinker with the engine and whether they should change this bit of rigging or that. Hank and Unk ran Sandringham Marine Services and looked after all the swing moorings, and everybody's boat was on the swing moorings. So this was the centre of the beachside society. I'd like to see this shed become an integral part of revitalising this whole area. Just 2 weeks ago I had an interview with some consultants working for Parks Victoria, and I have said to them that what I believe is important is that we retain our maritime heritage here, and that I believe it's time that they had a good look at the public jetty and made it a destination. By that I mean that they should be making sure there's a deep water approach to the jetty. They should encourage the people running ferries, and they're doing that now from St Kilda to Williamstown and up to the Yarra. They should try and extend them to this area. That the jetty itself should be a destination, and one of the ways they could do that would be by putting an archway at this end of it, as there is at St Kilda, so that people could identify more closely with the fact that they could be drawn in onto the jetty. That the jetty should be given a treatment more in line with its age, because it was modernised some years ago, and it should go back to heritage painting of cream and green, or plum red and cream or something like that. But the lights on it should be more of a proper jetty style so that it looks attractive and it's a place that people can go to. If that were the case, then this whole precinct would need some sort of attention to make it what I think it should be, a destination.